Hey, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm very pleased and have to have with me as my guest Eric Wiener, who's a partner at Morrison and Forster. Eric, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Richard. Thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Eric, you have one of the more unusual backgrounds I come across. I see you were an undergraduate math major. Tell me a little bit about the genesis of that.
Sure. Well, since I was a young kid, always loved math. I had a lot of fun when I was younger doing those Dell logic problems. I don't know if you remember them, was with the grid where you knew like Andrew and Betty and Charles live on a
Mm.
street and one has a yellow phone and one has a green phone. Anyway, I did a lot of those, probably to the detriment of my social development, but loved that and did a lot of math in high school and was I got pretty advanced compared to the normal sort of sequence of classes. And so from a young age, thought I would go on to be either go into math or go into engineering. And so that was sort of my plan as I headed to college was to become a math either professor or an engineer.
I see. So math was always your strong subject. It was kind of like the thing that you knew you were going to do.
It was, and I think it was because it was what I really enjoyed doing, and
Right.
it's been a good lesson going forward that you often will be very good at what you enjoy doing, and that's sort of the path I followed at least through college and shortly after college in terms of the math aspect of it. Yeah.
Totally get that. Tell me a little bit what kind of upper division courses did you take in math? What did you end up kind of specializing in for your major?
Yeah, so in college, I was an applied mathematician, so
Hmm.
ordinary and partial differential equations,
Hmm.
optimizations, things of those sort. Not as much as not as many courses in like the abstract side of things.
Yep.
I enjoyed the more sort of practical application components, and so that's what I specialize. I remembered in particular, there was one class that I took in optimization where we did all these interesting problems about, if you had a network of airports and airlines and having, you'd be given 18, 20 nodes of different airports with all these different routes that had to be accommodated and finding the math behind that and the matrices that you would use to find
Hmm.
the best process. I found that a lot of fun. Given what's happened the last few years with the Southwest and some of the other airlines having a difficulty with that, maybe I should have pursued a different route, so to speak. But
Did you have to do any kind of senior thesis or research paper to graduate?
I didn't because I ended up while I was at school, I went to a small liberal arts college up in Maine. One of the advantages of that type of education is that you're sort of forced to take a lot of other classes outside of what your major would be. And
Mm-hmm.
by about my sophomore year and junior year, I realized that I really enjoyed the government classes I was taking, in particular the pre-law classes. I took constitutional law with an adjunct professor who was an attorney in Lewiston, Maine, and I just really fell in love with the Socratic method and with law in general. And
Okay.
obviously, given
Yeah.
where I'm sitting today, that ended up being an important uh, academic exposure for me.
Oh, very
And
interesting.
so
Huh.
I ended up taking a lot of political science and pre-law classes over the last 2 or 3 years of my time in college.
Right. So did you think about graduate school at all, or you decided that that was not in for you for sure?
No, I didn't. I mean, I by the time I was a senior in college, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. I
Oh,
realized
okay.
that sort of all
Huh.
the classes I took, the constitutional and educational law classes that I had taken were the ones that I found myself staying up at night thinking about the most and doing extra reading. And so
Oh,
I
wow.
knew I needed to follow that. But I had started doing some teaching in the summer after my junior year. I taught for a program and was exposed to getting a chance to sort of teach classes. And I had been a math tutor all through college. And so I decided there was no rush to go to law school and that I would I planned to teach for 1 year, which didn't end up happening because I realized in that first year of teaching, you spend a lot of time coming up with your course plans for the whole year. And I realized it might be nice to stay for a couple of years and get better at it and use the course plans that you would come up with. And so I ended up teaching for 4 years,
Oh,
but
wow.
then eventually did go to law school.
Yeah, that's a long time. Where did you teach and what levels of math did you teach?
So I taught in Washington, D.C. at a private school called the National Cathedral School for Girls.
Hmm.
And I taught sort of a variety of classes. I taught on the high end, I taught the linear algebra and vector calculus to the students who had taken advanced placement calculus their junior year. And I
Wow.
also taught advanced placement calculus and honors pre-calculus.
Hmm.
But and so I taught a lot of the sort of strongest math students at the school, but I also taught several courses that were filled with students who were not the top end of
Yeah.
the math spectrum, so to speak. And I actually found those classes, the regular paced algebra 2 class and the regular paced calculus class, to be the most rewarding, because it was the students in those classes, and it wasn't that they weren't as good at math as everyone else. It was
Right.
that back in seventh or eighth grade, they didn't follow the rules for doing the problems the same way that everybody else did. And so they were not accelerated like their peers were. But some of them were really some of the best sort of problem solvers that I ever taught, even if they weren't as good at following the rules and doing the problems time and time again. And teaching those classes, I found myself having to explain concepts to people who didn't necessarily view the world the same way I do in the first
Yeah.
instance. I mean, when
Yeah.
I was teaching linear algebra, vector calculus, I was teaching very like-minded people in that our brains were sort of wired the same way.
Yeah.
Teaching students in algebra 2 was much more challenging and much more rewarding, because it forced me to try to explain things differently, not the way that necessarily I got them intuitively, but come at it from a different approach, a more graphical approach, a more visual approach, whatever.
Totally.
And developing those skills and being able to explain things to people who might not have their brain wired the exact same way that mine is was incredibly helpful. And I found it to be one of the most valuable experiences so far in terms of helping me with my current job, where I enjoy more than anything trial work and presenting to juries and getting ready to present to juries, and thinking about how you take very complicated concepts and very complicated subject matter in patent litigation and reduce it to what will resonate with the jury, who might be 7 to 12 people who their brains might not be wired the way yours is. And it's those experiences, I think, from teaching that have helped me the most in my current job.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I had some experience. I was a TA in college, and I do know that when you explain something to somebody, and as you point out, sometimes you try different ways of explaining it to try to make it clear. And then when somebody gets it, it's pretty exciting because you kind of see their eyes light up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I get it," and that's kind of exciting when you explained it in a way that somehow they were able to understand it that maybe previously they hadn't.
Yeah.
So I know a little bit of what you're talking about. Were you kind of a good teacher, like all along, like even as a kid or even in high school? Like, were you always explaining things to people? Was that kind of in your nature?
I think it was. Thinking back to high school, I don't recall. I mean, I would help my friends with their math problems. But it wasn't until I got to college where I started sort of my college job was to be a math tutor, and so
Okay.
that's where I really started doing. And I think I was good at it, and I know that it made me feel good, because you know, being able to explain something to someone who, especially someone who's coming to tutoring, who's feels like that, it's not their strong suit. They have to get
Yeah.
through the course. They're not understanding it from the professor, and being able to explain it to them in a different way so that it clicks and that they're able to sort of use that and do other problems that you're not telling them how to do, and solve those problems. That's a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why, even though in terms of subject matter, I knew that I wanted to go into the law, that's why I spent time before going to law school sort of teaching,
Teaching.
because
That's
it was
really
a lot of
cool.
fun.
Without being too modest, were you a popular math teacher? Did the kids really think you were good? Like, what was?
I I was. I think it helped that I was one of the youngest by 15 to 20 years of the teachers on the faculty. And so it would, the seniors that I was teaching were, what, 5 years younger than I was, whereas
Right.
the
Right.
average teacher, I think, at the school was probably in their 50s or 60s. And so it did that aspect made it easier to relate. And also my sister had attended that school, and so a lot of
Mm.
it was a little bit probably of an unfair advantage when I went to apply for a job there. They had me teach a class, and they happened to plot me in a class that was my sister's grade. My parents were in the foreign service, so she had moved to
I,
Paris at the time, so she wasn't there. But I knew all of the students in the class. And so they would ask questions and I would call on them by name. And I remember the head of the math department just being blown away at my memory for people's names. And I had disclosed, I told them that my sister had gone to the school there, but that, so I maybe, I maybe got an unfair advantage getting that job in the first instance. But yeah, I would say that in general, I enjoyed teaching the classes, and I think my students enjoyed
Yeah,
the classes as
that's a
well.
great story. So since you had taken all these pre-law classes and you'd taken the constitutional law class, I'm assuming when you got to law school, it wasn't much of a surprise or much of a challenge, or what was it like?
Sure, it definitely was. I mean, I will say, I think having spent 4 years teaching and not being a student myself, that put me in a different mindset and perspective for when I had to go back and be a student.
Yeah,
That probably made that easier. I think had I gone straight to law school from college, first year of law school would have felt like an incredible amount of work. And it is an incredible amount of work. But when you compare it to, a full day of teaching, and then I would coach sports after school, and then I would grade papers and come up with lesson plans, I was spending a lot more time every day working as a teacher than even than doing all the work for the first year of law school, even with extracurricular activities. So
yeah,
I think
totally.
that part helped me. But it was a lot of the learning was just a brand new experience, which is what I was out after. I mean, I remembered all of the classes that I took in college that were pre-law. Every time I had a class, and every new case, you learn something new and sort of go in a new direction. That's what I was after, and so that was there. But I certainly it's not like I could just take the con law final in law school because I had taken a pre-law con law class. That a lot of reading that I still had to do.
No, I get that. Did you do any teaching or anything in law school for like younger, like junior law students when you were nothing like that? Did you ever do any of that?
I did. My second year, I was a teaching assistant for the legal
Okay.
writing class for
Yeah,
my
yeah,
professor who I had been, the professor I had for my small section legal writing class asked me
yeah,
to be a
yeah,
teaching
yeah,
assistant for
yeah.
that next year. So I got to do
Interesting.
that. And
So
then,
now I'm assuming you don't get to use your math much in your current job. Is that a fair statement,
oh,
or do you?
oh, how wrong. How wrong you are, Richard. No, currently I'm in, most of my work is in patent law right
Uh-huh,
now.
uh-huh.
And uh, I didn't start off in IP or in patent law. I
Oh,
got into it when I used to be in DC at a law firm in DC that I was just a general commercial litigator, and
oh.
I got pulled onto a couple of patent cases because they wanted somebody to focus on damages.
Hmm.
And it always shocks me, and everyone knew, oh, he was a math teacher. He can probably read spreadsheets. And it always shocks me that in every law firm I've been, you're full of you're an environment with people who have very healthy self-esteem about their own intellects. But
Yeah.
everyone has, a lot of people have a degree of mathophobia, which is unbelievable. We'll be
Uh-huh.
in a high stakes litigation with lots of important, very complicated facts at issue, complicated technology, and then there'll be spreadsheets with the finances, and half the people on the team are like, don't want to touch it with an 8-foot pole. And so I was brought in on a few cases at my old firm to sort of focus on the damages side of thing. Of patent cases, and I found I really loved those cases a lot. Not just the damages side, but to
Oh,
really do
interesting.
and understand damages in a patent case, you have to really get to understand the technology, and getting to
Right.
learn technology in each case was a lot of fun. And patent cases are, they're an additional degree of difficulty from a procedural perspective, with a whole bunch of other rules and deadlines that are
Yeah,
involved. And
right.
again, I'm that little kid who did the Dell logic puzzles when he was young. I'm someone who loves that additional layer of complexity. So
Huh.
I haven't looked back ever since. I do almost all patent cases now, some trade secrets as well. But so
What's
I still tend to focus a lot on the damages stuff in a lot of my cases, just because I've now built up a very strong understanding and familiarity with the case law there. But it also involves, some getting to work with numbers and getting to work with some of the concepts that I've always loved.
what's the thorniest technology you've had to kind of grapple with in your as a patent lawyer that you've
I,
come across?
so I'll say, for me, the most thorny technology tends to be on the software side of things,
Mm.
just because of how the patents are written
Mm.
and how they are sort of intentionally drafted to sort of grab as much in terms of the sphere of possible application in the future, as opposed to even very complicated biotech cases. Those are generally, much more concrete technology at the end of the day.
Mm.
The software aspect, I find the hardest to sort of sit down, get your head around what's actually being claimed, what the actual invention is, and then thinking about how that applies to different web services or different programs or different firmware or whatever you might be dealing with. And then always thinking at the end of the day, how is this going to play to a jury? How are they going to understand what it was that was invented here?
Yeah.
There's nothing you can really hold up and show them. Almost any other case, either it's biotech or some sort of microchip or anything like that, there's usually some sort of physical aspect to it that you can use. And software is the toughest from that perspective.
That makes sense. Do you ever see yourself teaching law at some point in the future, or do you get to do that? Do you get to use your teaching muscle in any way other than, talking to juries and that sort of thing?
Sure, yeah. No, I would love to. I live in Berkeley, so I've well, just moved to Berkeley about 4 or 5 years ago, and so would love to be more involved with the university. I currently am involved with the Berkeley Law and Technology practicum, where
Mm.
about every year or every other year, I work with a couple of students who are doing sort of a landscape analysis for a startup company that doesn't have enough money for legal counsel. They say, hey, here's our product, or here's what we're planning to do, and you have a law student and then a PhD student generally team up together to sort of think about how to best look at the landscape out there and see what kind of barriers there might be to this company that's at a very early stage, but too early to really have the means to be able to get a lawyer to let them know, like, hey, this is a great idea, but you bring it to market and you're going to get slapped with an infringement suit on day one. And so that's a lot of fun to sort of work with the students to devise a strategy to come up with how to best advise those clients, but also, to realize that these are students who only have heard about these concepts in the classroom setting, generally speaking, and getting to use several years of my experience having actually helped clients in this area and see where litigation happens and what its effects can be and what people ultimately care about in terms of what the landscape looks like, what the safety, what their own claims look like. It's a lot of fun, and I find myself sort of relying a lot and telling stories about things that have happened to me in my practice in working with these students. So I've gotten to do that, but I haven't yet taught any classes or anything at Berkeley, but I would love to.
I'm guessing that you're on the short list for every associate as a partner mentor.
You'd have to ask them. We don't get to see those kind of 360 reviews. You don't get to see the outcome of that.
But is that something you enjoy doing, like mentoring associates and teaching and stuff like that? Is that kind of part of do you kind of go out of your way to do that a little bit more proactively?
It is. It is. It's something that I find, was something that was really important for me when I was coming up, to have people who had sort of gone through the progression of, for me, I was interested in becoming a partner at the firm and talking to people who had done that and sort of managed the stress of the job and the political aspects that can arise as you're thinking about partnership and thinking about developing practice areas and areas of expertise and developing relationships with clients. Having people who've done that and navigated that well, sort of to talk to and to take an interest in you, I always found to be incredibly important. I had 2 or 3 people along sort of my progression that I sort of would point to as being really instrumental in that. And so I want to be there for the more junior attorneys here to provide that. And so and it's fun to sort of talk to more junior attorneys to find out what they want out of the career. You don't get the same answer from any person, and thinking about how best to tailor what their experience can be and what they should be on the lookout in terms of cases or opportunities outside of the firm. It's very fun for me, and so it's not something that I find myself forcing myself to do, so to speak.
Can you still solve a differential equation today?
You know, part of me was a little bit worried when thinking about preparing for this that you would throw an integral or a differential equation at me. I think some of the easy ones I could probably get, but any ones that require, difficult transformations or things like that, I probably would have to spend some time with a piece of paper and a pencil. If you give me one of those Dell Logic puzzles, though, I can probably take that.
Well, Eric, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. Like I said, you have one of the more interesting backgrounds, and it was a real thrill to hear from you directly today. And I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks so much, Richard. I really enjoyed it.
This is Richard Hsu and Eric Wiener. Thanks.